"I am this widow's lawyer," Jesus Christ said to the judge. And something impossible happened. The courtroom had gone still, the kind of silence that presses against the ears. Polished wood-cold marble and the low hum of fluorescent lights framed a moment no one expected. At the bench, Judge Raymond Hale paused with his pen hovering above the page. He had ruled on thousands of cases, foreclosures, evictions, numbers that rose and fell with paperwork, but something unseen tightened his chest now, as if the air itself had shifted. Across the aisle, Grace Miller stood alone at the defense table. No attorney beside her, no tablet glowing with exhibits. Just a thin folder clutched in hands that trembled despite her effort to stay composed. Behind her, two teenagers sat shoulder to shoulder, Ethan staring straight ahead, jaw clenched. Sophie holding her breath, fingers interlaced so tightly they had turned pale. They had watched powerful lawyers speak with certainty, watched timelines and charts tell a story that erased their family's truth. They had felt the verdict closing in like a door. At the plaintiff's table, the bank's counsel exchanged a brief, confident glance. To them, this was routine. Systems were reliable. Records were definitive. The law properly applied was predictable. The case was finished, everyone could feel it. Then the judge felt it first, a presence not heard by the room, yet unmistakable within him. Clear, calm, unarguable. "I am this widow's lawyer." Not a thought he formed, not a memory, a declaration that settled with weight and warmth at once. His breath caught. His pen slipped from his fingers and clattered softly on the wood. Grace had dropped to her knees moments earlier, not to disrupt the court, not to make a scene, but because she had reached the end of herself. Her voice, steady in its surrender, had filled the room, a simple appeal for truth, for justice, for help beyond human limits. The words lingered in the air unanswered until they were. Judge Hale looked up, eyes searching the space above the courtroom, as if light might break through the ceiling. It did not, yet something had entered all the same. He removed his glasses, pressed his palm to the desk, and felt his pulse racing. 30 years of law had trained him to trust documents. This moment demanded something else. The clerk noticed the change first. The attorneys noticed next. Confidence flickered, then faltered. Ethan felt it like a hand on his shoulder. Sophie exhaled for the first time in minutes. Grace lifted her head, not knowing what had shifted, only knowing that hope, real living hope, had stepped back into the room. "Recess," the judge said at last, his voice unsteady but resolute. 30 minutes. No one argued. No one spoke. Because whatever had just walked into that courtroom did not wear a suit, did not carry a briefcase, and yet for the first time that morning, the impossible felt close enough to touch. The cold had not yet lifted from St. Louis when the letter arrived. A gray Monday morning pressed against the small house on Hawthorne Street, frost clinging to the edges of the windows, as Grace Miller folded the last jacket she had stitched through the night. The heater hummed weakly. Dawn light barely reached the kitchen table where a stack of unpaid tailoring orders lay beside a mug gone cold. Then came the knock, quick, official, already moving away. The envelope was thick-stamped and left without a signature. The courier did not wait. He never did. Grace picked it up with hands roughened by decades of needle and thread, the paper heavier than it should have been. Inside, black letters delivered their verdict with practiced efficiency. Notice of eviction foreclosure hearing scheduled, Friday. 4 days. 4 days to defend a home that had sheltered birthdays and illnesses, laughter and grief. A home where her husband had carried their newborn son through the hallway at midnight. A home where he had died believing the mortgage was finished, the future secured. Grace lowered herself onto the front step, the cold seeping through her coat as the words blurred. The door creaked open behind her. Ethan appeared first, tall, for 16 eyes, already reading trouble in his mother's posture. Sophie followed, pulling a sweater tighter around herself. "Mom," Ethan asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Grace handed him the letter. He read it aloud, every line draining color from the morning. "This doesn't make sense," he said when he finished. "Dad paid it off. He showed us the receipt." Grace nodded, tears tracing the lines of her face. She remembered that evening clearly, her husband's tired smile, the stamped paper, held up like a trophy, the relief in his breath. "You'll always have this house," he had said, "no matter what happens to me." Inside, the kitchen felt smaller than it had an hour before. Grace opened the metal box where their lives were kept in careful order, Utility bills, bank statements, tax forms all neatly filed. She searched once, then again. The payoff receipt was not there. By nightfall, the cold had deepened and so had the fear. Papers spread across the table like a losing hand. The children watched as their mother moved through memory, through drawers and folders, through every place certainty should have lived. Nothing. The one document that mattered had vanished. Outside, the street lights flickered on indifferent. Somewhere across town, systems updated and records locked into place. And in a small house still holding the warmth of a family's past, a clock ticked loudly toward Friday. By Tuesday morning, the house felt different, as if it were holding its breath. Grace Miller sat at the kitchen table long before sunrise, a single lamp casting a tired circle of light over stacks of paper. The metal box lay open beside her, its contents arranged and rearranged with growing urgency. She knew these documents the way some people know prayer by heart. Utility bills paid on time, bank statements neatly folded, years of proof that her husband Daniel had never been careless, never late. And yet the proof that mattered most was gone. Daniel Miller had been meticulous to a fault. Even during the months when illness hollowed his frame, he had insisted on driving himself to the bank. Grace remembered that final visit with painful clarity. He came home pale but smiling, easing himself into the chair with a soft exhale, the way a man does when a burden is finally lifted. From his jacket pocket, he produced the stamped receipt, the mortgage payoff in full, and held it up between them. "It's finished," he had said, his voice weak but certain. "This house is yours and the kids. No one can touch it." Ethan remembered it too. From the doorway now, he watched his mother search and felt something sharp twist inside his chest. He had seen the paper with his own eyes. The bank logo, the date, the ink still fresh. It had been real. It had existed. He opened the closet and checked the shelves where his father used to store documents, then moved to the garage, running his hands along dusty boxes, as if touch alone might summon the missing truth. Sophie knelt on the floor of her parents' bedroom, lifting old photo albums and envelopes from beneath the bed. Each item told a story: birthday cards, hospital forms, handwritten notes Daniel had left during chemo treatments, but none of them told the one story that could save their home. With every empty folder, her throat tightened. It felt as though something had been taken not just from the box, but from their family's memory. By afternoon, the table was covered in paper and silence. Grace pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to understand how something so specific could vanish, while everything else remained untouched. She replayed that evening again and again, Daniel's relieved smile, the way he had insisted the receipt be placed in the box, the promise in his eyes. He would not have misplaced it. He could not have. As dusk crept through the windows, a terrible question settled into the room. If the receipt was gone, had it ever truly existed in the eyes of the world? Outside, a neighbor's car passed, music low and distant, life continuing as usual. Inside, a family faced the quiet terror of knowing the truth and realizing that without proof, the truth might not be enough. By Wednesday morning, Grace Miller walked to the bank with her shoulders squared against the cold, wearing the black coat she reserved for moments that mattered. Prosperity National Bank rose from the block like a monument, glass, steel, and polished stone, reflecting a city that moved faster than she ever had. Inside, the air was warm and impersonal. Shoes clicked across marble floors. Screens glowed with numbers that meant nothing to the people who passed beneath them. Grace waited in line, rehearsing her words, clutching a folder that suddenly felt too thin. At the reception desk, a young woman with flawless makeup glanced up briefly, then back to her monitor. Grace explained carefully, respectfully, that there had to be a mistake. Her husband had paid the mortgage in full. The proof was missing, yes, but the payment had been made. The records would show it. The receptionist typed for several seconds, her nails tapping out a quiet verdict. She did not look up when she spoke. "Our system doesn't reflect a final payoff." Grace leaned forward, heart pounding. "Could you check again? My husband came here himself, 2 months before he passed. He showed us the receipt." Another pause. Another glance at the screen. "Ma'am, our system doesn't make mistakes." The words landed with mechanical finality. Not cruel, not kind, just programmed. Grace asked to speak with someone else, a supervisor, anyone who could look deeper. The answer came back unchanged, routed through policy and procedure, like electricity through wire. Foreclosure cases were handled by legal. Any dispute would be addressed at the hearing. Without documentation, there was nothing more to discuss. Behind the glass offices, employees moved from desk to desk, efficient and insulated. From their perspective, this was routine accounts, balances flags triggered by algorithms. No one saw the night Daniel had struggled for breath, yet insisted on finishing what he started. No one remembered the stamp on that paper. The system did not store relief or promises. It stored only what remained after deletions. Grace felt heat rise in her face as other customers shifted behind her. She lowered her voice, pleading now. That house is all we have. My kids. I'm sorry, the receptionist said, already reaching for the next file. You'll need to resolve this with your attorney. I don't have an attorney. A brief shrug. Then you may represent yourself. Grace stepped outside into the wind, the bank doors sealing shut behind her, with a soft, definitive click. Across the street, traffic flowed, horns punctuating a city unbothered by one family's unraveling. She stood there for a long moment, staring at her reflection in the glass, smaller than she remembered, blurred by glare. Inside the building, the system continued humming, confident and intact. Outside, a woman walked home, carrying the weight of a truth the machine refused to recognize, realizing with painful clarity that against a system built of screens and certainty, human memory counted for nothing at all. That evening, the house filled with the soft hum of an old computer fighting to wake up. Ethan Miller sat at the desk his father had once used, the screen casting a pale blue light across his face. He had learned enough at school to know where adults forgot to look: hidden folders, archived emails, cloud backups saved automatically without anyone noticing. If the receipt existed anywhere, he was certain it would be here. His father had been careful, too careful to leave something so important unprotected. Grace watched from the doorway, saying nothing. Hope flickered each time the cursor moved, each time a progress bar crawled across the screen. Sophie hovered nearby, knees pulled to her chest, whispering silent prayers she was too afraid to say aloud. Ethan worked methodically. He searched email accounts first, bank notifications, scanned documents, anything with the word mortgage in the subject line. Hundreds of messages appeared, years of confirmations and reminders, but none from that final day. He checked the desktop, then the documents folder. He opened an external drive labeled Taxes Keep, then another marked House. The screen filled with files, dates, and numbers. Still nothing. His jaw tightened. He moved to the cloud. Password recovered. Folders synced. Old photos loaded, birthdays, holidays. His father smiling despite the pain. But no PDF. No scan. No image of the paper that should have been there. Try the recycle bin, Sophie said softly. Ethan did. Empty. Hours passed. The house grew quieter as night settled in the heater, clicking on and off. At one point, Ethan found a spreadsheet his father had kept, every payment tracked to the cent, every date accounted for. The final line read, "Paid in full." His heart leapt, then sank. It was only a note, no attachment, no proof the world would accept. Grace came closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. She could feel the tension in him, the same determination Daniel had carried. She wanted to tell him to stop, that it was okay to rest, but she needed this as much as he did. They all did. Finally, Ethan leaned back, eyes red from staring at the screen. "It's like it never existed," he said, the words catching in his throat. Like someone erased it. Sophie turned away, pressing her face into her sweater. Grace closed her eyes, the room spinning with a terrible clarity. The bank system had nothing. The computer had nothing. Memory alone stood against silence. On the desk, the cursor blinked steadily, indifferent. Outside, a neighbor's TV laughed through thin walls. Inside, a family stared at a glowing screen that offered no answers, only the cruel confirmation that the last place hope could hide was empty too. By Thursday morning, hope had thinned to something fragile and sharp. Grace Miller sat at the small kitchen table with her phone pressed to her ear, the cord wrapped loosely around her fingers. Across from her, a legal aid pamphlet lay unfolded, its promises of free assistance and access to justice now reduced to a single name circled in pen. This was the last call, the last door. On the other end of the line, the young attorney listened in silence as Grace told her story. She spoke carefully, laying out the facts as she had learned to do: dates, payments, the missing receipt, the bank's refusal to look again. There was no anger in her voice now, only a quiet urgency. She had learned that pleading made people uncomfortable. Precision did not. "I understand," the attorney finally said. His voice was kind, professional, exhausted in the way of someone who had seen too many losses. "And I believe you. I really do." Grace closed her eyes, gripping the edge of the table. Ethan and Sophie stood in the hallway, pretending not to listen, every word cutting through them anyway. But without the payoff receipt, the attorney continued, "The court will rely on the bank's records. They'll have sworn statements, certified documents. Judges don't rule on memory, they rule on evidence." "So there's nothing you can do?" Grace asked. There was a pause long enough to say everything. "I could stand next to you," he said carefully. "I could speak on your behalf, but I wouldn't be offering you a real defense. And I have 3 emergency hearings tomorrow for families already facing removal." "I'm sorry." The line went quiet. When Grace thanked him, her voice did not break. She ended the call gently, as if noise might shatter what little strength remained. The kitchen felt smaller after that. The clock on the wall ticked louder each second, marking the distance between now and Friday. Sophie sank into a chair, staring at nothing. Ethan paced, once, then stopped, fists clenched, searching for something to hit that would not hurt anyone else. Grace gathered the pamphlet, the notes, the phone, stacking them neatly, as if order could still change the outcome. She had believed that somewhere someone would step in, that the system had a safety net for people like her. Now she understood the truth. No brochure ever printed help had limits. Compassion had schedules. That night, as the house settled into uneasy quiet, Grace stood alone by the sink, staring at her reflection in the dark window. No lawyer, no document, no leverage, just a courtroom waiting. Whatever hope remained did not come from calls or paperwork anymore. It would have to come from somewhere else, or not at all. Late that night, when the house had finally gone quiet, Grace Miller knelt beside her bed. The clock on the nightstand read just past midnight. Friday was no longer a distant threat. It was hours away. From the hallway came the faint sound of her children's sleeping breaths, uneven, exhausted from fear they were too young to carry. The walls around her seemed closer than before, as if the house itself knew it was in danger of being taken. Grace had prayed all her life. Simple prayers. "Thank you" prayers. "Please watch over my children" prayers. But this night was different. There was nothing left to organize, no one left to call, no argument left to rehearse. Every human door had closed. She folded her hands, not out of habit, but because they were shaking. "Jesus," she whispered, her voice barely filling the room. "I don't know what to do anymore." No polished words followed, no rehearsed faith, just truth. "I don't have a lawyer. I don't have proof. I don't have power." Her breath caught. "But you know the truth. You saw Daniel pay that house. You heard his promise. You know I'm not lying." Tears slid down her cheeks and soaked into the carpet beneath her knees. Grace did not wipe them away. "If I have no attorney on this earth," she said slowly, each word deliberate, "then Jesus, be my attorney." The room did not change. No light filled the corners. No voice answered back. Yet something shifted all the same. The weight on her chest eased, not gone, but lighter, as if it had been placed into stronger hands. Her breathing steadied. For the first time since the letter arrived, her thoughts stopped racing ahead to disaster. She stayed there for a long moment, kneeling in the quiet, no longer trying to solve what she could not. Across the hall, Ethan stirred in his sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Sophie turned onto her side, clutching her pillow. Grace rose quietly and stood in the doorway, watching them. Whatever happened tomorrow, she knew one thing with a clarity that surprised her. They were not alone. Morning came gray and cold, just like the others, but Grace woke with an unfamiliar calm. The facts had not changed. The bank still had its lawyers. The receipt was still missing. The hearing was still scheduled. Yet as she dressed in her simple black coat and gathered her worn folder, there was a steadiness in her movements. Fear no longer led. She had handed that burden over in the night. And somewhere beyond documents and deadlines, beyond courtrooms and systems, a case had been taken by an attorney no one could see, but one who never lost. Friday morning arrived without mercy. The civil courthouse stood heavy and gray against the winter sky, its stone columns rising like a warning rather than a welcome. Grace Miller climbed the steps slowly, each one echoing beneath her shoes. Ethan walked at her side, shoulders squared, trying to look older than 16. Sophie followed close behind, her eyes fixed on the ground, as if afraid the building itself might look back at her. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Security gates beeped. Voices bounced off high ceilings. Lawyers moved with practiced confidence suits, pressed briefcases, swinging like extensions of their arms. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going. Everyone except the woman clutching a thin manila folder and the two children trailing behind her. Courtroom 7 was already filling when they arrived. At the plaintiff's table sat Harrison Knox, CEO of Prosperity National Bank. His silver hair perfectly combed his expression, calm, almost bored. Beside him were three attorneys' laptops, open folders stacked neatly. Documents arranged with military precision. They spoke in low voices, nodding, smiling slightly. To them, this was not a family's home on the line. It was a routine procedure. Grace's table was empty. No attorney pulled out a chair for her. No legal assistant whispered instructions. She set her folder down gently, as if noise might expose how little was inside it. Behind her, Ethan and Sophie took their seats in the first row of the gallery, hands clasped together. From there, they could see everything and felt powerless to change any of it. The contrast was impossible to ignore. On one side, wealth preparation, certainty. On the other, a widow and two children holding nothing but truth and prayer. David without a sling. Goliath armed with policy and precedent. Ethan leaned forward, whispering, "Mom, are you okay?" Grace nodded, though her heart was pounding. She glanced once at the bank's table, at the screens, glowing with numbers that denied her reality. For a moment, doubt flickered. What if faith was not enough? What if this was where everything ended? Then she remembered the words spoken in the dark hours of the night before. "Jesus be my attorney." The courtroom doors opened and the bailiff's voice cut through the low murmur. "All rise." Judge Raymond Hale entered, black robe, flowing, his expression unreadable. He took his seat, scanned the room, and paused briefly when his eyes reached Grace's table. She stood alone, hands folded, meeting his gaze without challenge or apology. The case was called. Names echoed. Formalities followed. As everyone sat, the weight of the moment settled fully onto Grace's shoulders. This was it. No delays, no more calls, no backup plan. Just a woman standing before a system far larger than herself, yet no longer entirely afraid. Because while every eye in the room saw only David and Goliath, Grace knew something they did not. She had not come alone. The bank moved first, just as everyone expected. Attorney Derek Caldwell rose from his chair with the ease of a man who had done this 100 times before. He adjusted his tie, clicked a remote, and the screen mounted on the courtroom wall came alive. The logo of Prosperity National Bank appeared crisp and authoritative, followed by charts and timelines that told a clean, efficient story. "Your Honor," Caldwell began, his voice steady and rehearsed. "This is an unfortunate case, but it is also a simple one." As he spoke, dates appeared on the screen. Payment histories, monthly balances, a neat line that stopped 2 years earlier. According to the system, the mortgage had never been paid in full. According to the system, Grace Miller had defaulted. Grace felt the words land like blows. She wanted to speak, to interrupt, to say it wasn't true, but the rules of the room held her still. Caldwell continued, pacing slightly. He spoke of fiduciary duty, of depositors, of policies that could not bend for personal circumstances. He acknowledged the loss of Grace's husband with a brief, practiced note of sympathy, then moved on as if grief were a footnote. "The bank's records are certified," he said. "They are audited. They do not lie." Another click. A sworn affidavit appeared on the screen. The name of a senior loan officer filled the frame, accompanied by a statement confirming that no final payoff had ever been processed on the Miller account. The language was airtight, legal, final. Behind Grace, Sophie's fingers dug into Ethan's sleeve. Ethan stared at the screen, disbelief tightening his jaw. Every number erased his father's promise, reducing a lifetime of sacrifice to a missing line item. When Caldwell finished, he turned slightly toward Grace. His expression softened just enough to appear humane. "We understand this is difficult," he said, "but the court must rely on evidence, not recollection." Judge Hale looked down from the bench. "Mrs. Miller," he said evenly, "do you have documentation to refute the bank's records?" The question hung in the air. Grace stood slowly. The folder in her hands felt weightless now, almost mocking. "My husband paid the mortgage in full," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "He showed us the receipt." "Do you have that receipt?" the judge asked. "No, Your Honor." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Caldwell did not smile. He didn't need to. Grace opened her folder anyway, laying out years of on-time payments, proof of responsibility, character references from neighbors and employers. It all spoke to who they were, but none of it proved what mattered most. Caldwell rose again. "With respect, Your Honor, character does not cancel debt." The words were sharp, efficient, and devastating. In that moment, the bank's story closed around Grace like a frame, clean, logical, and complete. A widow became a debtor, a home became a liability, and truth without a document to anchor it drifted toward irrelevance under the bright, unblinking light of the system. The silence that followed felt heavier than the verdict itself. Grace Miller stood at the defense table, the bank's words still echoing in the room, evidence, records, default. Judge Hale's gaze rested on her, waiting. The attorneys had returned to their seats, confident pens poised as if the outcome were already written. In the gallery, Ethan's breath came shallow. Sophie's eyes burned as she fought back tears. This was the moment when most people lowered their heads and accepted what the system decided. Grace did not. Her hands loosened around the thin folder. She took one step back, then another, and before anyone could stop her, she sank to her knees on the cold courtroom floor. The sound was soft, almost polite, but it cut through the room like a bell. Gasps rippled. A bailiff shifted, uncertain. The judge straightened in his chair. Grace bowed her head. Her voice did not rise in anger or spectacle. It carried the steady clarity of someone who had reached the end of every other road. "Jesus Christ," she said loud enough for the room to hear, quiet enough to remain a prayer. "You know the truth." The words hung there raw and unguarded. She did not look at the lawyers. She did not look at the judge. She looked beyond them. "You saw my husband pay for that house," she continued, her voice trembling now but unbroken. "You heard his promise to our children. I have no lawyer here. I have no proof these men will accept. But you see everything." Ethan stood halfway from his seat, frozen, torn between fear and awe. Sophie covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. Around them, the courtroom had stilled, not from command but from shock. This was not procedure. This was not strategy. This was surrender. "If I have no attorney in this court," Grace said, lifting her face at last, "then Jesus Christ be my attorney." No applause followed. No objection was raised. Even the bank's attorneys remained seated, expressions caught between discomfort and disbelief. The air itself seemed to pause, as if waiting for permission to move again. Judge Hale removed his glasses slowly. His hand hovered over the bench, knuckles whitening. For a brief, unguarded moment, the practiced distance in his eyes faltered. He had seen desperation, before tears, anger, bargaining. He had never seen faith placed so plainly on the record. Grace stayed where she was, kneeling, unashamed. She had said everything that needed to be said. Whatever happened next was no longer hers to control. The courtroom held its breath, and somewhere beyond charts and affidavits, beyond policy and precedent, a line had been crossed, one that could not be uncrossed, where a widow's quiet declaration stood exposed to the judgment of heaven and earth alike. The judge was the first to feel it. Judge Raymond Hale had been preparing to speak words measured, procedural, final, when something unseen pressed against his awareness with unmistakable force. Not a thought he reasoned into, not an emotion he chose. A presence, clear, authoritative calm, settled within him as surely as the bench beneath his hands. "I am this widow's attorney." The pen slipped from his fingers and struck the wood with a sharp click. The sound startled the room. Judge Hale drew a slow breath, eyes unfocused, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then he straightened. "Recess," he said, his voice steadier than his pulse. 30 minutes. Confusion rippled across the courtroom. The bank's attorneys exchanged glances. Grace remained on her knees, head bowed, unaware of what had shifted, only that the air no longer felt hostile. Ethan felt it like a hand closing around his heart. Sophie squeezed his arm, whispering, "Something's happening." Behind closed doors in his chambers, Judge Hale paced, once, then stopped before his desk. 30 years on the bench had taught him to trust systems, records, timestamps, audit trails. He sat open the case file on the court's secure system and prepared to confirm what he already knew. The screen flickered. Once, twice. The cursor moved by itself. Judge Hale leaned back breath-catching as folders opened without command. A directory he had not selected appeared. A file name materialized stark and impossible. Miller Mortgage Payoff PDF. He stared as the document opened. There it was. The bank's letterhead, the account number, the amount paid in full, the date 2 months before Daniel Miller's death, an official stamp, a signature, every detail intact, every detail exact. His hands trembled as he checked the metadata. The upload time read 10:23 a.m., 3 minutes earlier. The user field was blank. "That can't be right," he murmured. The door opened softly. Court clerk Linda Perez stepped in summoned moments before. She adjusted her glasses and leaned toward the screen, her face drained of color. "Judge," she said quietly, "there's no user ID, no access log. It's not possible." "Check the physical archives," Judge Hale said, voice low but firm. "Now." Minutes later, Perez returned with a thin folder held as if it might vanish. "This was listed as lost," she said. 18 months ago. She opened it. Inside lay the same payoff receipt, original stamped pristine resting, where it should have been all along. Silence filled the chamber. Judge Hale closed his eyes. The presence returned, not loud, not dramatic, simply certain. Do justice without fear. When he stood, something in his posture had changed. The skepticism that once guarded his rulings had given way to resolve. He gathered the documents, squared his shoulders, and walked back toward the courtroom. 30 minutes were up, and the impossible had already taken its seat. When Judge Raymond Hale returned to the bench, the courtroom sensed it before he spoke. Something had changed. He did not shuffle papers or adjust his robe. He looked directly at Grace Miller, still kneeling, hands folded, eyes lifted in quiet expectancy, and then at the bank's table. His voice, when it came, carried a weight no procedure could explain. "Before this court renders judgment," he said, "additional evidence has been discovered." A ripple ran through the room. The bank's attorney stiffened. Harrison Knox straightened in his chair. Judge Hale raised the document. "This is an official mortgage payoff receipt issued by Prosperity National Bank, dated 2 months before Daniel Miller's death. It confirms the loan was paid in full." Grace's breath caught. Ethan's knees nearly gave way. Sophie pressed both hands to her mouth as tears spilled freely. The lead attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, that document is impossible. Our system." "Sit down," Judge Hale said calmly. "This document exists in both the court's digital system and its physical archives. It bears your bank's stamp and an authenticated signature." He turned to the clerk. "Call the loan officer who signed this." Minutes later, the man stood trembling at the witness stand. Under oath, his voice cracked as truth finally broke free. The payment had been made. The record had been erased on orders from above to clear properties for a redevelopment project. All eyes turned to Harrison Knox. The judge's gavel came down once. "This court finds that Prosperity National Bank acted in bad faith, falsified records, and attempted to defraud a widow and her children." He paused, then continued, each word deliberate. "The eviction is dismissed with prejudice. The Miller family retains full ownership of their home. Furthermore, this court orders damages and refers this matter for criminal investigation." Knox was escorted from the courtroom in stunned silence. Grace did not cheer. She did not raise her hands. She simply bowed her head, tears falling onto the courtroom floor, not tears of victory, but of release. Ethan wrapped his arms around her. Sophie clung to them both. A family had been spared. A promise had been kept. In the weeks that followed, the story spread. Other families came forward. Investigations widened. Careers ended. But something else began. Grace used the settlement to establish the Divine Advocate Fund, providing legal help to families with no voice. Judge Hale, forever changed, began each day in prayer, no longer believing justice was only ink on paper. And wherever Grace shared her story, she said the same thing: "I didn't win because I was strong. I won because Jesus Christ took my case." If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to Stories of Grace and join a community that believes faith still moves mountains, and that when Jesus is your advocate, the verdict is never in doubt.